everyone, this is Grace Estrada, All College Curriculum Chair, and today we're going to go over how to update courses in CurriQunet Maverick. So I will go ahead and go to CurriQunet. Let me share my screen. So here we are in CurriQunet Maverick. So this is the public dashboard, and what I want to show you is that there's actually a little checklist for if you are updating a course. So in this checklist, it goes over each of the pages in the course proposal so that you can look back on this and kind of make sure that you have everything addressed that you need to. So let me go ahead now and go to another screen. And that would be, let's take a look at the proposal. So what you would do is from this public dashboard or even your global dashboard, which is where you would, you can actually customize it. You'll go to curriculum and course. Now, the default is that it will bring up all of the courses that are in our curriculum management system. So I recommend filtering it out, go to your particular discipline. So in my case, I'm going to do psychology. And in terms of status, select active and in review. So that way you can see if there's anything, any kind of proposals already in the queue. Because if there is something already in review, you cannot do another proposal. So that's something very key to remember. Then you go to search. For example, if you have a proposal for updating the DE addendum, you would have to have that completed before you can start another course proposal. So let's say I want to modify. So in terms of updating a course, you would be selecting the modify course proposal. And it will pop up the different choices. You want to choose modify course. And that will trigger a full course review. Remember that based on Title V, a non-CTE or career education course needs to be updated every 6 years, and the career education courses need to be updated every 2 years. So go ahead and hit create. And that will bring up the course. What it's actually doing is it is cloning the course, and your course that was originally active will become historical once the updated course becomes active. So let's wait for it to pop up, and I will go over each tab with you. The first tab you'll see is called the main page. And you'll see an orange, it'll tell you what still needs to be completed. So it says 1 out of 18 requirements remain. So first one is your discipline. And it should only pop up disciplines for which you have an FSA. Check the course number, that will be unlikely to change. There's the course title, short title, and then justification. So the justification for proposing the new revision is something that needs to be accurate because it alerts the reviewers to the reason why you are doing the update. So it could be as simple as periodic update requirement, or it would be maybe updating the student learning outcomes or adding objectives. Whatever it is that you put in the justification, you would add it there. So this was basically a clone of the new course proposal. So what you see here is the justification for a new course. So instead, I would say this is a required periodic course update, and that would be fine. You do want to look at the catalog description and make sure that the focus is on what is going to be covered in the class. So you don't want to say students will learn, because we cannot actually read our students' minds. What you can promise is what the course will cover. And so that's what the reviewers will be looking for. Remember to try to keep it student-centered and don't add things that require us to read students' minds. So not students will gain knowledge or students will learn, just focus on what will be covered. In terms of proposal information, the first semester intended to be offered, if it is a transferable course, it is likely to be the following year or longer. Because in terms of articulation, even after it goes through our local process, it has to be sent in for articulation. So instead of fall 2025, we can wish for fall 2026, but it's more likely to be fall 2027 at this point. And you only complete same as or replaces if there is another course that is the same as this one. So an example for that would be if you have a non-credit course, you might put same as or something like that. It's unusual to have that circumstance. Co-contributors. So this is different. In Maverick, you actually have to select form properties, and this is where you would enter your co-contributors. Also new is that you can indicate what this co-contributor can change. So you could start off with check all and then say, I don't want this person to go through, assist or the DE addendum. So it really indicates which components you want your co-contributors to be able to change. So I'm going to take out assist because we don't need that. We don't want to change any codes and dates. And then we leave completed by dean because eventually the dean will have to look at it again. But everything else I'll be, okay, I think we have to take a look at this together. So this is a new feature of Maverick where you can actually limit how much a co-contributor can do in the course. Units, hours, if there are any changes to the lecture units or lab units, that change needs to be indicated in the lecture or lab content. So let's take a look at that. Lecture lab content, that needs to be in outline form. And we want to make sure that capitalization and punctuation are consistent. Remember that the course outline of record is a publicly facing document, so we want it to be as perfect as possible. Some things we look at, for example, in this outline form, every heading is in title case, right? So you have capitalization of the major words, whereas the subcomponents are not capitalized and there's no period or punctuation. Those are little things that we do look at. And you want to make sure, again, is the lecture content reflective of the rigor? So this is especially important in transferable courses. A good starting point would be the CID. You want to make sure that the information is covered. Also remember that this is what faculty will be looking at when they're going to teach the course. So you want to make sure that all of this material is reflective of what the students need to learn in order to move on in their academic journey. The objectives is another requirement. If you haven't updated your course in a while, this is new. And the objectives are the little steps that faculty teach in order for students to achieve their student learning outcomes. So the objectives, as you can see, this course doesn't have any right now because it was first introduced before this was a requirement. The objectives should be reflective of the lecture or lab content. Together, the student learning outcomes and the objectives should both reflect lecture and lab content. So you would have to add this one at a time. So let's say one thing I could do is, okay, maybe I can highlight this foundations of psychology. And I would recommend that you actually have this on another document in case something goes wrong. So let me just give you an example. Add, so you go plus add objective, click on the down arrow, and there's the objective text. So identify or explain. Remember that you should be using Bloom's taxonomy. So this is what what are little tasks that students have to do. Once you're fine with that, you can move it up. and it automatically saves it. Then you move on to the next objective, plus add, and there you go. And then you would add, and I'm just gonna copy it again. So remember that you're only required to do the full assessment on student learning outcomes. So we expect to see quite a lot of objectives. And the objectives should be distinct from the student learning outcomes, which is the next page. If you are looking at your CID, the CID actually provides objectives already. So that's, again, a great starting point. Go to the course identifier descriptors, and that will give you ideas of what the objectives should be. The student learning outcomes, right now there are 5. I would reduce that because when this course was first created, we did not have objectives. So one possibility is maybe I will just take the outcome and I will paste it in as an objective. So I can edit the objective that I had, and then I can come up with the outcomes afterwards. So that's one approach that you could take. Remember, the outcomes and the objectives should be different. The student learning outcomes should be higher level than the objectives. So if an objective might be to list major scientific studies, a student learning outcome instead might be to analyze them. So it's a higher level in Bloom's taxonomy. So again, we will be looking very carefully that the objectives and the learning outcomes, both of them, should not require reading students' minds. So it shouldn't be learn this, know that. It should be something demonstrative. What are the students doing to demonstrate that they have this knowledge? We also want to avoid in the student learning outcomes verbiage that indicates demonstrate understanding of, because that's still not telling us how they're demonstrating it. Give us an idea. Are they listing? Are they explaining? Are they analyzing? Those kind of verbs are what we're looking for in the learning outcomes. Also required, so objectives, again, you need to go back and forth, and ultimately what is in the lecture and lab content should be reflected in your objectives and student learning outcomes. The student learning outcomes have another component that says assessment methods. So these are recommended assessment methods for the learning outcome. Explain the major scientific studies. Okay, so how are we going to assess that? Well, we could do it through discussions, essays, exams, final project, or homework. These are recommendations. Another part that's really important is, are you changing the student learning outcome because of assessment data? So maybe it turns out that one of the SLOs just isn't feasible in terms of assessment, or maybe isn't practical for the students. Then you might alter the way the verbiage of the student learning outcome. And the third part, so you have in your SLOs, you have the actual outcome text. That's one part. You have to indicate recommended assessment methods. That's the second part. And then the third part is to map the student learning outcome to an institutional learning outcome. So we have 5 institutional learning outcomes: communication, inquiry and reasoning, information competency, social responsibility, and personal development. Look back at the verbiage of your student learning outcome and then connect it. What makes sense in terms of the institutional learning outcomes? So it's explain the major scientific studies which form the basis for current theories. Well, if you're explaining something, you are communicating, and you have to have competency in terms of the information. So those are the 2 components that I would mark, and potentially inquiry and reasoning. So you would do that for every single student learning outcome in your course. Okay, methods of evaluation and examination. So this is sort of overlap with the student learning outcomes. Anything that's listed in the recommended assessments for student learning outcomes should also be reflected in the evaluation method for the course. Hopefully one day we're going to resolve that and only have faculty fill out one part. What is important if it's a transferable course is that you have to have a critical thinking example. This is important because our partners, in terms of articulation, look at our critical thinking example, and that's reflective of the rigor of the course. So compare qualitative and quantitative scientific approaches to studying interactions of human social behaviors. Okay, that sounds like a pretty good example there. What you should note is that you have this methods of evaluation and examination, critical thinking example, and then you will have another one further down, homework. And those two examples are going to be different. So just jump ahead to homework. Analyze the impact of social media and lived experiences on the development of your intersectional identities. Key is that if you read the example, it should be written as if the student were reading it. So you should not have students will analyze. No, just put the instructions as if the student were reading the homework. Textbook and learning materials. You should have at least 3, and they should be less than 5 years old. So let's take a look. This is a common reason why faculty would have to update their courses. So for example, 2021, we're still good. The other component that we're going to be looking at is consistency in how you are writing out your titles. So for example, it says Social Psychology, 14th edition. And we have numerical 14, TH space edition. And if we look lower, okay, the other social psychology book that we're looking at is 11th edition, and you'll see that there is consistency in how we represent what edition it is. So those are some things that we look for as well. If you have an OER textbook, you can put it here in other learning materials and also include the link. And we are collaborating to figure out how best to enable our faculty to have OER options in the textbooks as well. Prerequisite, co-requisite, we're kind of moving away from those kind of requirements, but if you have them, you would just simply go to this page and put plus add. If you were to have one, remember that you have to, per the instruction, complete the prerequisite, co-requisite validation page. So let's go to that. And it has certain reasons. Validation information. So what the choices are would be that there is another course, the comparable type in the CSU or UC that's lower division. And it would also ask you to identify which universities have the similar course. And you would indicate the course number, any prerequisites, catalog year for when you identified it. The other option is that the prerequisite actually has major concept skills or knowledge that they would need to be successful in the course. And that's where you would indicate, specific concepts or competencies that the students would need. And then again, clarify why each item is essential to success in the course. This only needs to be completed if you have a prerequisite for your course. Conversely, if you have a prerequisite and you realize it's not needed or it's mandated that it's not needed, you would have to indicate it in the removal tab. And here you'd mark, have you removed a requisite from this course record? You would mark yes, and then explain why. Separate, distinct from prerequisite or co-requisites is advisory or recommended preparation. So in other words, the students can take the course, and this is what we believe they need to be successful in the course, but they're not required to have it. So you can see that it can be English C1000, which is completion of the English composition. Either you advise them to be eligible for it, or you advise them to have it completed. There is a big difference, right? Once it's completed, they already have those skills in terms of English composition. So the completion of English C1000 as an advisory is much higher level than just being eligible for English C1000. And then similarly, you have, in terms of math levels, are there certain skills that you believe students would need in order to be successful? And then you would indicate recommended preparation here as well. So these are all ways that counselors and faculty can kind of indicate what level this course is for our students who are taking it. Ultimately, what we want is our students to be successful. Homework, as I mentioned before, this is where you would indicate how many hours per week. So if it's a 3-hour, if it's a 3-unit course, you would have 2 hours per lecture unit and you would calculate it out. And then here you would write down what kind of assignments are outside of the classroom. And again, a critical thinking example that is different from the homework example. If you aren't sure what numbers to put in, I recommend looking at a course that is similar. So maybe this is Psychology 12, Social Psychology. A similar course may be Developmental Psychology. So you can look at the numbers for that. Method of instruction. This is also a relatively new requirement where you would indicate what kind of instruction it is. So if it's lecture only, that's what you put. Some people have lab only or lecture lab. Different types of courses or instruction types are listed here. You just select which ones apply. Also indicate whether it's only by letter grade. So you can look the options, pass, no pass, non-graded. Make sure you clear this with our articulation officer so that we're not violating any requirements. And also consider if you want students to be able to get credit by exam or credit for prior learning. So again, I recommend that you speak to our articulation officer who would be the best person to advise you on whether it's appropriate for your course or not. Also, we want to really kind of keep track of how our faculty really incorporating the values of opportunity, equity, and social justice in our courses. So we do ask and require that you indicate which of the equity-minded instruction strategies are being used for this course. So we have 4 choices. Culturally responsive teaching is when we encourage our students to connect the content with their cultural context. Sorry about that. In other words, you have a concept and then you might say, well, how would you apply this in your life or in your family? We know, right? Lots of research indicates that when you encourage students to connect with their own lives, that they actually retain and learn the information better. So that's what culturally responsive teaching is. Inclusive instruction fosters a sense of belonging or community. It can be similar to culturally responsive teaching, but maybe it's something where you have the students have an assignment where they go out into the college campus or into their community and connect with individuals there. Again, the more you have students do that, the better their retention and learning. Social justice teaching involves teaching students about equity, fairness, and the importance of challenging oppressive systems. This is may not be appropriate in all disciplines, but we wanted to have that option. Again, maybe you have them go out and do surveys or talk to the community, talk to other students about certain concepts in class that really pertain to this component of social justice. And then universal design accommodates individual learning differences through flexibility in how students engage with material. So this would, if you use multimedia, if you have the options of maybe having videos, having discussions, interactive things, how is it that you're really trying to accommodate the different learning styles of our students? So you have to select at least one of these, and then the others are optional. Do you apply case studies, class discussions? So these are active learning strategies. Many of us use these. So there are different types. Individualized learning. Do you encourage them to think about how they think and learn? Do you have them do case studies, things like that? So those could be individualized learning. And then experiential learning, if you have them go on field trips or labs, offsite activities, and multimedia teaching. So this is required so that we have a good sense in terms of how are we teaching our students? And it makes it an easy way that we can tabulate and report it if it's ever needed. This is also helpful if there are any grant proposals or those kind of activities that we're engaged in. Okay, status. Is this course something that is going to go to an associate's degree or a certificate? So this is where we would indicate it. Criteria, courses AA and AS applicable if letters A to F are all checked. So you would indicate if it's transferable, is it appropriate as a prereq? Do you have essays at the college level? So think about all of these parts, how much homework is required. This helps with status. Again, we can have a discussion if you're not sure. You can always talk to me or the articulation officer. Laura is our articulation officer, is like the best source for this, absolutely. Also indicate if it has a baccalaureate status in terms of being applicable for a bachelor's degree, and mark the correct or appropriate components. If it is not, if it's simply occupational or non-credit, you would indicate here in non-AA status, or if it's a basic skills course. So you could go through it again. If you're not sure, one recommendation I make is to look at similar courses and how they're completed. Program status, this has been changing because of CalGETC. So you want to make sure you know whether or not the course is applicable to our new CalGETC pattern. And you can check again with our articulation officer for this part, but try to complete it as best as you can. And if it's transferable, whether it's somewhere you want to go for the CSUs, or if there's a CID descriptor that's also aligned with it. So it would be over here, that's where you indicate the information. General education status, this is where you would indicate if it applies right here. You have District GE and CalGETC. So you want to double check if your course applies to either of those. Completed by dean, you cannot touch. Material fees, check that as appropriate. Of course, we want to minimize any material fees to our students. Codes and dates, you're not going to fill that out. That gets filled out in tech review. I do encourage you to do the DE addendum, and that's because if there are any kinds of problems, last minute changes, we want to make sure that it's very easy and smooth to shift to an online modality. I marked all of the modalities available, and you would indicate how it's going to meet online. There are check boxes to select. I recommend selecting all of them except for other, because when other, you have to be specific on what you are doing. So just take a look at that and make sure you have all of those components addressed. As you can see, what was orange before that said requirements, that there were 18 requirements still needed, it's now green. It says complete. Once that happens, go ahead and launch your modified course proposal. And as soon as you do that, be sure to check your email, because you will get emails from Vicky, our curriculum coordinator, or from me, alerting you to when it is up for technical review, or if there are any changes that are needed. So I hope this is helpful. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.